Order G-186, resuming the debate adjourned on April 20th, 2016, on the motion for second reading of Bill 186, an act to establish the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan.
When we last debated this issue, the member from York Simcoe had the floor. The member from York Simcoe.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to be able to continue on the theme of yesterday, just to bring people together and understanding where we were. The critical issues here in this pension plan are the impact that it will have on the unintended consequences, the impact that it will have on various members of society, not all of which are, I think, really in their best interest. There are sort of a few key words that I think people need to be aware of as they try to understand what, in fact, is being recommended by the government, what is being pushed forward by the government. And the first is the fact that this was designed for a very special group of people, those people without workplace pensions. And when that idea was floated out, there were some studies that were done to determine who we're talking about and how long that was. But people recognize that there were a lot of jobs part-time and where they had very little number of hours to work at. And so there was a general sympathy in looking at how to respond to the problem of there being no workplace pension. But the signal light went up when that got floated out amongst the businesses through organizations such as the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Ontario Chambers of Commerce, who all then looked at their membership, who were able to point out that they are stretched very thinly. And there are so many people, frankly, who own the businesses so they have a job. And there isn't much left over. And in today's macro system, there's not much left over either. When you have the most debt of any subnational state in the world, with almost $300 billion in debt. And it costs about $11 billion for the servicing of that 300. And so that's the backdrop to this piece of legislation. And it's kind of the elephant in the room, so to speak. So there's always a problem that's there. And people in the private sector have recognized increases in the hydro rates, for instance, both at home and at work. They have recognized that in the last budget there's been a whole list of licenses and fees and things that will be charged to the individual. The threat, I would argue, of a cap-and-trade carbon tax is looming on the horizon. And so when the notion that an employer and an employee would have to put forward 1.9% towards a pension fund, there are many businesses for whom that is actually a decrease in hours or actual layoff. And so the cruel irony that there is actually a number attached to the number of layoffs that this will trigger, it gives you a sense of, as I say, the cruel irony that without a job, you certainly can't be collecting a pension. So for the people who might lose their jobs as a result of this initiative, this is a very real life threat. So the that was the initial area of concern. And then the government decided as well to introduce the comparable, the notion of what's comparable. And it took them several months to establish some parameters so that now this brings in a huge segment of the population that had no idea that they would be part of this pension for people who didn't have a workplace pension. And here I'm talking about people who are employed in the private sector, who have pensions, and who are relatively satisfied with that system as it is. And it's an important economic driver in this province. The fact that pensions, private sector pensions, are administered and held by banks and insurance companies and various other investment opportunities. And so they now suddenly get sucked into this whole equation because they find themselves, the private sector businesses, now having to look and see whether or not they measure up to something called comparable. And comparable in this context means that your pension is good enough. It's good enough for the government's definition. And without going into all of those details of the definition, the simplest one is to look at a defined contribution pension plan that is supported with less than 4% from each side. So in other words, many pensions are 3 and 3, 3% by the employer and by the employee. Now all of a sudden, these people aren't deemed comparable, and they would have to make alterations. Well, the private sector is looking at itself in terms of what kind of changes does that make. And that's really, Madam Speaker, where we are today in terms of the ripple effect, if you like, of this bill, is that suddenly people who had no idea that they would be drawn in, they understood it to be a bill that was for people who actually don't have a workplace pension. And they, I am sure, never imagined that they would be drawn into a very complicated exercise with the government spread out over years. And businesses then are going to have to choose whether they join the ORPP, or can they measure up to the rigors of being comparable. So those are the kind of issues that still stand out in the discussion on this bill. There are many others, and but I think you have to come back to the timing and the notion that we're going to have a payroll tax included now in this province, just at a point when S&P dropped its credit grade, the lowest level ever. These are the kinds of things, I mentioned the hydro rates, and certainly the scandals, spending scandals, and the ever-rising debt. So into those situations now comes for individuals who never imagined they were part of this, now to look at this notion of comparable. And so the other aspect of that, of course, is the impact of making it more costly to do business in this province. Because any kind of payroll tax that is a job-killing one, which we know this to be, hinders the ability of the private sector to do what it does best, actually provide job opportunities for people and strengthen our economy to attract investment. I recently mentioned that Canada's economy is growing, but we must remain prudent and fiscally sound. To conjure up a further tax on Ontarians now will run the real risk of adverse effects. Outside a recession, this is the worst possible time to enact a $3.5 billion payroll tax. As I mentioned earlier, Ontario is the largest subnational debtor in the entire world, just over $21,000 for every single person in Ontario. Net debt to GDP has gone up nearly 50% under the Liberal government. Last year, due to the poor policies like this, the interest rates totaled $11.4 billion. After the major funding allocations like healthcare and education, that is the government's largest expenditure. I'm sure it would surprise many Ontarians if they really found out how much they are paying just in interest on the provincial debt. It averages $840 per person. That can be a rent payment for many working Ontarians. Yet this cost each year just keeps on rising. Ontario businesses already feel immense pressure, especially with competition out of province. With more regulations, hydro rate increases, and the newly proposed mutual payroll tax, businesses are being forced to reconsider investing in Ontario. And I know in conversations with my own constituents who have businesses that may employ 25 people, those are deemed small business. And certainly in the grand scheme of things they are. But there comes a point when the regulatory burden, the tax burden, just make it so that there's not much incentive to be able to continue. So Ontario's businesses face serious trouble as the province has no will to levy any taxation support. Businesses just won't have the capital to handle the financial blow and will be forced to close their doors. We see a government that would rather squeeze more money from a small business any means necessary, including a new mandatory pension tax. But I must repeat, businesses can only pay these when they make a profit. Business can only hire more employees and grow if the government allows them to do so. It is no longer a secret that each and every day, companies choose to pass Ontario by and find jurisdictions where growth is possible. And this brings us back to this ill-conceived plan that can further risk the state of the economy. The ORPP has continually evolved as a potential revenue, continually growing as it looks to pool as much revenue as possible, even if it means giving up a better plan. We all know that it's impossible to save for retirement if you have no job. As I explained yesterday, the government has no true need to squeeze Ontarians any further. The mandatory nature of this plan will jeopardize some of the most vulnerable by taking away what they spend each and every day on food, clothes, and ever-increasing bills for the benefits to be clawed back from them from 40 years from now. There are many successful other forms of savings plan. The pooled registered pension plan. In 2013, before this government decided to pay attention to the issue of retirement security, our PC caucus was hard at work. It was 3 years ago when I brought forth Bill 50, an act to require the introduction of legislation to allow for pooled registered pension plans. This plan, contrary to the mandatory Ontario plan, is a retirement savings option for individuals, including self-employed individuals. Another example of how the pooled registered pension is superior is it enables its member members to benefit from lower administration costs that result from participating in a large pooled pension plan. It's also portable, which is something that the Ontario one is not, and raises unanswered questions with regard to moving out of the province, having an employer that is a national employer, not a provincial one, and whereas the pooled pension goes with the individual from job to job. It's also able to, you're also able to go to participating provinces like British Columbia and Saskatchewan and Quebec. Since the investment options within a pooled registered plan are similar to those for other registered pension plans, its members can benefit from greater flexibility in managing their savings and meeting their retirement objectives. As a result of the repeated mismanagement and the growing infrastructure deficit, the Ontario Liberals are running out of ways to fund projects and political promises. By looking at the numbers, one can easily see the alarming pattern. For anyone counting, the new cap-and-trade scheme is estimated to take up $2 billion a year, not to mention another $4 billion from the sale of Hydro One. Now, keeping with this theme, the expected billions a year in revenue they plan to create through the Ontario Pension Plan by imposing the method of a payroll tax on employers and employees who don't have private plans deems adequate for their retirement. The real reason is the need for capital. And when you look at the management of money, since coming to power in 2003, the government has increased Ontario's debt by 115%, from $138.8 billion to $298.9 billion. The Ontario's debt to GDP ratio from a healthy 27% to an alarming 39%. More money is spent on interest on debt than on any other government function except for health and education. Ontario's credit rating has been downgraded, which makes it more expensive to borrow money. Finally, as a recent Fraser Institute report noted, since the 2008 recession, 66% of the debt the government has piled up has gone to meet government operating expenses, as opposed to being invested in capital projects. The real reason that this is a cash grab is because of the need to find capital money. I mentioned how the program has evolved from the people who weren't employed, then to people to help seniors. But seniors who are retired are obviously not eligible, and low-income retirees are already supplemented through OAS and GIS. And actually, they stand to be to hit the ceiling on their ability to collect OAS and GIS, so they actually would be clawed back. So also, just in the time I have left, that it's important to know who's in and who's out. As a result of federal jurisdiction and federal income tax pension rules, individuals such as the self-employed and First Nation will be exempted. The big development in the government's latest announcement was that those employees who are not Crown federally regulated workers or individuals that work in industries like marine, airlines, and airports, telecommunications, railways, and anyone who works with a Crown corporation will be exempt as well. This leaves about 4 million working in Ontario that will be split into two distinct groups: those who have some type of pension benefit, which will put to the government test of an annual contribution rate of 4%, for each employee and employer, respectively totaling a yearly contribution of 8%. And those who have no pension with their employer, which individual employees and employers will be forced to contribute an annual rate of 1.9. So in the time that I have left, I think it's really important that people understand how much more complex this has evolved from looking after those people without a workplace pension. And so while there's a great deal more I could say, I would just want to indicate how difficult it is for the average Ontarian who looks for his government to provide stability in his community and now is looking at the increased cost of living beyond being able to remain optimistic and hopeful. Thank you.